Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take you on a quick spin through the week's news. And on this week's show, coming to you from Brooklyn, New York, it is Danny Segura. While from Las Vegas, Nevada, we have the two OGs of MMA Junkie Radio, Gorgeous George and Goes. So without further ado, let's get these guys on the clock and get this thing up and running. We'll kick off this week as we take a look at the situation surrounding UFC heavyweight contender Curtis Blaydes. On Saturday night, he wrestled his way to a unanimous decision win over Alexander Volkov at UFC on ESPN 11. But given his position in the heavyweight division right now, did that win and that performance enhance his position at all? Dana White certainly didn't seem impressed based on his post-fight press conference comments, but were you guys? And what would you do with Blaydes next if you were the UFC? Bit of a tricky one to kick off this week, so we'll put 3 minutes on the clock. Danny, you can go first.
Yeah, this was really an opportunity for Blaydes, and he said himself, an opportunity to wait out for the belt. You know, he needed money. He said that if he was able to fight, he's able to hold off and, you know, for quite some time before he actually goes on to fight for the belt. But as far as him challenging for the belt next, this is really just a placeholder fight. He's not going to get a title shot because, for one, the heavyweight division needs to get sorted out with that trilogy bout with DC and Cormier and Stipe Miocic. And then on top of that, you got Francis Ngannou, who beat him twice, also waiting in line. So even though it was a big victory, even though he has an impressive win streak, it still seems that Curtis Blaydes is a little bit far away from fighting for the belt. So I think in this situation, he should just wait it out and see how the division shakes out. Like he said also in the past, we could very well see retirements out of that trilogy bout between Stipe and Daniel Cormier. So that could change things in the heavyweight division. So it was a good win. It reminds everybody that he's still an elite heavyweight, gives him a paycheck, but doesn't really go much higher than that.
Yeah, it's a tricky spot for Blaydes. Goes. Did he enhance his stock at all this weekend, do you think?
I think he did, in the sense that he did everything you would ask him to do in the fight. The only thing I can maybe nitpick, and I think that a lot of people saw, was the fact that he was running out of gas at the end. But, I mean, we're in a different era right now where you don't have all the things at your disposal of full camps, full training partners, and all that. And he was carrying a pretty hefty pace in that fight. You know, it was a good fight. As far as like the performance goes, I just don't understand why people are that critical of what he did. I'm going to say this until my face is blue, guys, but really, if you have a problem with the way Curtis Blaydes fought that night, your problem is not with Curtis Blaydes. Your problem is with the sport. He didn't break any rules or nothing. He fought a way that he should have. And if you look at his record, he has stoppages too. You know, this doesn't happen all the time with him. So I would look maybe for the winner of Rosenstruck and JDS, or Lewis and Oleinik, because I think he's going to be on the shelf too long, and he's going to want to take a fight. So I think eventually he'll probably have to.
Yeah, it's a tricky spot, George. How would you play it if you were Curtis, and how would you book it if you were the UFC?
He'll have to take another fight because the championship fight's in mid-August, so that's about 2 months away. And then we got a proper number one contender, in Francis Ngannou. And you got to believe that fight, look, best case scenario might be at the end of the year. Remember, the heavyweight belt hasn't been defended, twice in a year, very often as of late. So he's going to have to take another one. Simple as that. And yes, these guys covered it perfectly. His style is just – it's not the box office style that the UFC wants to promote.
Absolutely. And he's in a tricky spot. Francis Ngannou's the next guy in line, and he's beaten him twice by stoppage already. Tricky one for Curtis Blaydes. Let's take a look at another one of the big talking points from Saturday night. The first fight of the night saw debutant Max Roshkov step in on short notice against Austin Hubbard. And after a positive first round, ended up quitting on his stall at the end of the second. And thanks to the TV coverage, we could actually see and hear the conversation between Roshkov and his coach, Robert Drysdale, as he repeatedly told his coach to call off the fight, while Drysdale seemingly refused to do so. Eventually, the commissioners and the referee saw the situation, spoke to Roshkov, and the fight was stopped. It was a controversial incident with a lot of opinion flying around on social media afterwards. So my question to you guys is this. What was your reaction when you saw that all unfold? And do you think it was handled properly? And with the news of the Nevada State Athletic Commission maybe taking a look at it, do you think they need to step in and do anything to improve things moving forward? It's a tricky spot. 3 more minutes on the clock. Goes, be the first one with this one for us.
I think the Athletic Commission has to do things like this. It's their job. But I don't think very much is going to come out of it. Because I think if you go back and you look you're going to realize that both people were right in this instance. I think Robert Drysdale was right, and I think the fighter Max Rashkoff was right. It depends on how you look at it. Robert Drysdale's job, guys, is to motivate his fighter. The relationship between a coach and a fighter is very, very unique, and you have to remember these two live with each other. Nobody knows this guy better than Robert Drysdale. So if this were a situation where there was a bad injury or Rashkoff saying that he can't see or tore his ACL, that's a little bit of a different story. But in this situation, he led us to believe that he's okay injury-wise. It's just he just didn't have that motivation. He felt he didn't have that. I understand that, but the coach has to push him to the very end. And if you notice at the very end, he did give him he did go and say this fight is over. For Max going forward, if he can put things together, I mean, remember, this is 5 days notice against a tough opponent. If he can turn things around and he goes off and has a great career, then we'll probably look back and say, yeah, he didn't need to go out there and get KO'd just to do it. If he doesn't put it all together, then we look back and we say he may have blown an opportunity, but only time will tell.
Yeah, it's tricky arguments on both sides, George. Where do you sit on this one?
Well, for one, I think Drysdale had 60 seconds to try and keep his fighter in the game. You know, he was telling him to breathe. He was trying to urge him to continue. He knew the cameras were around. He knew it was quiet, and I think he was also looking out for his fighter because he didn't know how this would come off. In fact, when you hear a couple Dana White quotes, the first one was, "Hey, I'm not sure this kid's ready for this." That almost seems to imply, if we just hear that, like, "Hey, we might just part ways with him. He's not ready. He might have to go to another promotion and then come back." But then he went out of his way to say, "No. He did the right thing by quitting at that time if he just wasn't ready to continue." So I can imagine that Robert Drysdale's trying to process all this. So he was trying to get his fighter out there. The fighter didn't want to continue. That's fine as well. As far as Nevada State Athletic Commission goes, I think they got their job to do, but I think they'll find out quickly that there wasn't anything egregious taking place.
Yeah, Danny, it's a tough one. This, how do you assess this one from the fighter standpoint, from the coach's standpoint? How do you see it?
Yeah, I think we need to start reassessing what the corner's role is in a fighter's life. I think most of us see it as trying to help the fighter win at all costs during a fight, but we have to look at the big picture, at the long career. This kid was just 25 years old, very young, first fight in the UFC, took it on short notice. I mean, he's got a really long career ahead of him. And I think the corner did fail him in the sense of he shouldn't have been able to say those words, I'm done, call it. A corner not only has to stop the fighter from getting hurt inside of the octagon as well, but also protect the fighter's image. If you look at Deontay Wilder's situation when he fought Tyson Fury, the whole storyline was, the corner was the one that got me to quit. I didn't want to quit. I wanted to continue. And I feel like that's the position that, the corners need to sometimes put themselves into. They need to sort of take it for the team and protect the fighter's image as well. So he looked to be in a rough spot. I think it was ultimately the right call for him not to continue to fight. But yeah, I do think that, the corner did fail him in that situation.
Yeah, it's a very tricky subject. We had to go a little bit over on that one, but I think it's important that we all got our point across on that one. It's a tough one. I just hope that Max Rashkoff gets another chance in the UFC, but with a full training camp, and we can see the real Max Rashkoff inside the octagon next time round. Let's take a look at another story from Fight Night this past weekend. One of the highlights of the night at UFC on ESPN 11 was Jim Miller's first round finish of hot prospect Roosevelt Roberts as he armbarred his way to third on the all-time wins list, ahead of the likes of UFC Hall of Famer Michael Bisping and soon-to-be Hall of Famer George St. Pierre. I think most people are probably in agreement right now that Miller deserves a spot in the UFC Hall of Fame when he retires, even though he might not finish his career with a UFC championship belt in his locker. And it made me wonder, guys, what other non-champions do you think should the UFC be inducting into the UFC Hall of Fame in the coming years? Give us a name and make the case. 2 minutes on the clock for this one, so keep them nice and snappy. George, you go first.
All right. So I know they're going to fight, in about a month or so, but technically at this moment, Joseph Benavidez is a former WEC fighter and a current UFC fighter, and he hasn't won that major title. So, in a month and a half, I might look like a fool right now. He's holding the belt, but as of right now, he hasn't. He's done very well as a bantamweight and very well as a flyweight. And if he were to not win the title in about a month, I still think he has a career worthy of a Hall of Fame because he's been able to do it in two divisions and do it well.
Awesome. Danny, who makes your list?
I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball here and mention the Diaz bros. I mean, I think it's the two most iconic brotherly duo that we've seen in MMA, period. And also, they've really, even though they've kind of been anti-company, they've played a big role in the company's buildup. I mean, they've helped sort of have the biggest rivalries with the biggest stars in the UFC. Nick Diaz with George St. Pierre, right? Nate Diaz with Conor McGregor. So, it takes two to tango, and sometimes it takes two to sort of, elevate the sport and bring everything up. And, although Nate Diaz and Nick Diaz have sort of been anti-company per se, certainly they've played a big role in the UFC and MMA. So I think even if neither of them get a hold of a belt in the future, which I think it's probably what's going to happen, they should still be acknowledged in the UFC Hall of Fame.
I love that shout. Outstanding. Goes. Who makes your list?
My choice here, guys, has to be Alistair Overeem at 46-18. The guy he's headlined countless amounts of cards for the UFC, even going back to Strikeforce, Pride. He's fought in every environment you could think of, even outside of MMA. And although he doesn't have a belt, you have to remember he has wins over 6 former UFC champions, and that's about as close as you could get without actually winning the belt. So that's my guy.
Yeah, that's a great shout. I love the Diaz brothers, though, Danny. I think that's a superb pick. And I know before we came on air, we talked about a few other options. Diego Sanchez definitely deserves a shout as well. First ever tough winner. And I know he's in there for his fight with Clay Guida, but as a fighter on his own, I think he deserves a shout as a UFC.
Hall of Famer. Show up to the ceremony. That's the question.
Can you imagine them in the jackets? I don't know if they'll wear the jackets.
Yeah, everything.
I'd love to see the speech. The speech would be something else. But let's move things on. Final topic this week. The UFC Apex plays host to UFC on ESPN 12. As lightweight contenders Dustin Poirier and Dan Hooker throw down in the main event of the evening. Should be an absolute banger of a main event. Everybody knows this already, and they're probably already pretty excited about it. So for the final topic this week, I need you guys to give me one other fight from Saturday's fight card that you're personally excited about, and let us know why everybody else out there should be just as excited for it too. 2 minutes on the clock, so it needs to be pretty tight. Danny, kick us off.
I'm going to go with Luis Peña versus Kamaworthy. That is a fantastic fight I'm really looking forward to. And Kamaworthy got kind of forgotten a little bit. I mean, he's only fought once in the UFC when he made his debut, obviously. And he had a fantastic first-round knockout with a beautiful left hook. And that was all the way back when Stipe Miocic and Daniel Cormier fought for the second time. So it's been a while. So he's a little bit forgotten. So just wanted to highlight him, that this guy could very well be a big player and certainly an exciting player in the UFC. And look, he's fighting Luis Peña, another very exciting fighter who's got an interesting style and someone that's fun to watch. So I have my eyes on that fight, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, should be a cracker. Goes, what's your pick?
Mike Perry and Mickey Gall, guys. I mean, let's look at it this way. When have they not produced good fights? When has there not been heat going into a Mike Perry fight? My only concern is that they actually make it to the fight. The way Mike Perry speaks on social media and how excited he is for this fight, I want to make sure that at the weigh-ins they keep them apart. At the hotel they keep them apart, because this is going to be a really, really fun fight. And I honestly think there'll be a finish in this fight, so it should be a good one.
Great stuff. George, bring us home.
Well, I like slobber knockers from time to time, and I think Maurice Green and John Vellante can deliver. John Volante's moving up to heavyweight, so let's see if he can reinvigorate his career, there at light heavyweight. I think he was more of a, we'll say, a top 20 guy, or maybe even outside the top 20 guy, but he never really got to surge forward. So the one thing you can never say is that his fights suck, that's for sure. And then with Maurice Green, he's just such a polarizing guy, and he can get real into it and real violent. And so that can make the fight really, really exciting. But that's probably one that I'm looking forward to. And it's probably the third one that I would have said, because these guys nailed it on their choices too.
Yeah, it's a good card. It should be another great night of fights down there at the UFC Apex. We will have blanket coverage of UFC on ESPN 12 across MMA Junkie for the entirety of the week. Keep it locked to MMA Junkie and all of the team across all social media channels. It's going to be a packed week, and it's going to be a great fight night. So keep it locked. Until next week, enjoy the rest of the fight week. Enjoy the coverage, and thank you for tuning in to Spinning Back Clique.